He thought my gift was a joke, something too small to matter, but he didn't know that inside it was a lesson that would cost him his home. Tell me, has anyone ever laughed at something you gave them, only to regret it later? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear. Now let's begin today's tale. My daughter's husband laughed at my gift. Now he can't pay his mortgage. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this unfolds. I had always believed that gifts should carry meaning, not just price tags. When my daughter invited me to their new housewarming dinner, I knew I wanted to give her husband something that wasn't just pulled off a store shelf. So I opened the old cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Inside lay my late husband's hand-carved tools. Each piece had been cared for lovingly, oiled and polished through the years. They weren't shiny or new, but they carried weight. Memories of his hands building cribs, fixing chairs, shaping wood into something lasting. I chose a set of chisels, still sharp, still gleaming with quiet dignity. I wrapped them carefully, tied with a ribbon, my heart full of hope. I thought Jason, my daughter's husband, might recognize their value. I imagined him smiling, thanking me, maybe even promising to use them in his own projects. That evening, the house buzzed with chatter. The table was full of food, laughter bouncing around the walls of their brand new home. When it came time for gifts, I slid my package across the table, smiling warmly. Jason tore off the wrapping, lifted the box, and pulled out the chisels. For a moment he just stared. Then he chuckled. "Tools?" he said, holding one up between his fingers. "Old tools? Well, at least they'll look good in the garage." The room went still for a second. My daughter forced a small laugh, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Jason set the chisels aside carelessly, already reaching for his wine glass. I laughed too, but it was hollow, thin. Inside my heart ached. He hadn't seen what I had given. He hadn't understood that those tools carried years of memory, of love, of hard work. To him, they were just junk, something to mock in front of friends and family. I sat through the rest of the evening, smiling when spoken to, keeping my voice soft, my eyes down. But inside, the sting grew sharper. I wasn't angry at the gift being dismissed. I was hurt at the disrespect, the careless way he brushed aside not only the chisels, but me, the woman who had offered them. That night, as I drove home, I glanced at the empty passenger seat where the gift had been. My chest tightened. Gifts are supposed to connect people. Instead, mine had been turned into a punchline. And yet, as bitter as it felt, I didn't say a word. I told myself to let it go. But something inside me whispered, life has a way of teaching lessons, even when people don't want to learn them. Jason had laughed that night. But one day soon, I suspected, the laughter would stop. The days after that dinner were heavier than I expected. I replayed the moment again and again, the way my son-in-law Jason had laughed when he opened my gift, holding it up like it was some cheap joke. My daughter's awkward smile, the silence at the table, my own forced laugh to cover the sting. It wasn't just about the gift. It was about respect, or the lack of it. I had chosen that gift with care, a set of hand-carved tools from my late husband's collection. They weren't flashy, but they were valuable, both in quality and in memory. I thought Jason might appreciate them as he built his new life with my daughter, maybe even pass them down one day. Instead, he chuckled, set them aside, and said, "Well, at least they'll look good in the garage." The words cut deeper than he realized. For years, I had been the kind of woman who gave quietly, time, energy, support. I wasn't used to seeing my efforts mocked, least of all by the man who promised to love and protect my daughter. And yet, that night, I had been humiliated in my own home. I tried to let it go. I told myself it's just a gift. Don't dwell on it. But every time I saw my daughter, every time I thought of those tools sitting neglected, the bitterness flared. Jason was so proud of the new house they had bought, the mortgage he bragged about, the shiny car in the driveway. He wore his confidence like armor, laughing off advice, dismissing anyone older as out of touch. That laugh at the dinner table wasn't just about the tools, it was about me, about the idea that what I offered, what I represented, didn't matter. But here's the thing about life: pride has a way of crumbling when tested. Within weeks, I began hearing whispers. Jason's job wasn't as secure as he let on. The company was downsizing. The new mortgage payment was higher than they'd planned. And those credit card bills? They were stacking up faster than his paychecks. At first, I stayed silent, watching from the sidelines. But a part of me began to think maybe the lesson he refused to learn at the dinner table was about to find him in a much harder way. And when that moment came, I knew I wouldn't need to raise my voice or remind him of the tools he mocked. Life itself would do the talking. It didn't take long for the shine of their new home to fade. At first, everything looked picture perfect. A big mortgage, shiny furniture, a car in the driveway that probably cost more than my first house. Jason loved to brag about it, smiling wide as he poured expensive wine and told stories of his big plans. But plans don't pay bills, and before long, the cracks began to show. My daughter called one evening, her voice hushed. "Mom," she said, "could you help us with groceries this week, just until Jason's next paycheck comes in?" I didn't ask questions. I filled a few bags with staples, bread, milk, eggs, some soup I had made, and drove them over. She hugged me tightly, whispering, "Thank you." Jason barely looked at me when I walked in, muttering something about a temporary setback. But as I glanced around, I noticed unopened bills stacked on the counter, red letters glaring from the envelopes. A few weeks later, my daughter called again, this time with tears in her voice. "Mom, the mortgage. It's more than we can handle. Jason said it would be fine, but we're already behind." My heart clenched. I wanted to scold, to remind her of the warning signs I had seen, but instead I listened, because sometimes silence speaks louder than "I told you so." I visited again and found Jason sitting at the table, his hands buried in his hair, the unpaid bills spread out like a losing hand of cards. For the first time, the arrogance was gone. He didn't see me at first, and I caught a glimpse of the boy behind the bravado, scared, cornered, and struggling. When he did look up, his eyes were red, his voice low. "We'll figure it out," he muttered, though it sounded more like a prayer than a plan. I didn't remind him of the night he laughed at my gift. I didn't mention the chisels collecting dust in his garage. Instead, I simply helped my daughter tidy up, fed the kids, and left quietly. But inside, I couldn't ignore the irony. The tools he mocked, tools meant for building, for repairing, for creating, sat unused while his world crumbled around him. Life was teaching him a lesson, and I didn't have to say a word. The weeks turned into months, and the cracks widened into chasms. My daughter's voice grew wearier each time she called. The savings they thought would last evaporated quickly, swallowed by mortgage payments, car loans, and mounting interest. Then one afternoon, I got the call I knew was coming. My daughter's voice shook. "Mom, they sent us a foreclosure notice. If we don't catch up in 60 days, we'll lose the house." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tightly. That house Jason had paraded so proudly, the symbol of his confidence, was slipping through his fingers. I drove over the next day. The once pristine lawn was overgrown, the shutters hanging loose. Inside, the air was heavy with stress. Bills covered the dining table. My daughter's eyes were swollen from crying. And Jason? He sat slumped in a chair, staring at the notice like it was written in a foreign language. When he finally looked at me, his face was pale. "It's not fair," he muttered. "I work hard. I deserve this house." I studied him for a long moment. Once those words might have stung me, the arrogance grating against my patience. But now, all I felt was a calm certainty. "Life doesn't hand us houses because we think we deserve them," I said softly. "It gives us tools, What we build with them is up to us." His eyes flickered, and for just a second I wondered if he remembered the chisels, the gift he had laughed at, tools that could have reminded him of humility, of patience, of the value of building slowly, tools he had left in the garage, untouched. He rubbed his face with both hands. "I don't know what to do anymore." For the first time, his bravado was gone. No laughter, no smugness, just a man stripped down to his mistakes. I didn't gloat. I didn't remind him of that night at the dinner table. But inside, I knew. The balance had shifted. The man who once mocked me now looked at me with something close to desperation. My daughter sat beside him, her hand trembling in his. "Mom, is there any way you could help us?" I glanced around at their home, so much of it bought with pride, not wisdom. And then I thought of the careful savings I had kept, the lessons I had learned from years of stretching every dollar, fixing what I had, and valuing what mattered. For the first time, Jason seemed to understand. The woman he had laughed at might be the only one who could keep him afloat. And that realization, more than anything, was the beginning of his true lesson. I sat across from them at the kitchen table, foreclosure notice spread between us. My daughter's eyes pleaded, full of fear, while Jason stared at the paper like it was some cruel trick. For a long while, I said nothing. I wanted the silence to weigh heavy, to press down the truth he'd been avoiding. Finally, I spoke. "I can help," I said slowly. Relief washed over my daughter's face. But Jason's shoulders stiffened. He hated needing me. "But," I continued, "help doesn't come without responsibility. If I step in, things will change. The late nights at the bar with friends, they stop. The endless gadgets and showy cars, gone. And most importantly, you will learn to respect the people who stand by you. That starts with me." Jason's face flushed. Pride fought to rise, but desperation held it down. He nodded, unable to argue. I pulled out a folder I had brought with me. Inside were the documents for a modest loan, enough to cover the overdue payments and stabilize the mortgage for a while. Not a gift, not a handout. A loan, with terms he had to agree to. Jason blinked. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," I said firmly. "You laughed at the tools I gave you, Jason. You thought they were worthless. But those tools represent something you've never had. Patience, effort, the ability to build instead of buy. I won't let my daughter and grandchildren lose their home. But if you take my help, you'll take my lesson too." For the first time, he looked me in the eye without mockery. His voice was quiet. "I understand." My daughter squeezed my hand, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Thank you, Mom." Over the following weeks, Jason swallowed his pride. He sold the fancy car, cut down on his spending, and even started picking up extra work. It wasn't easy for him. Each sacrifice chipped away at the image he had built of himself. But slowly I saw something new take root. Humility. One afternoon, as I was leaving their house, Jason stopped me at the door. He disappeared into the garage and returned carrying the chisels, the very gift he had once mocked. His voice was low, almost ashamed. "I think I get it now. These weren't just tools. They were a reminder." I smiled faintly. "They still are." That was the moment I knew the lesson had landed. He had once laughed at my gift, but now, with his pride in pieces and his mortgage hanging by a thread, he finally understood. The things we dismiss often turn out to be the very things we need most. In the end, it wasn't the money that mattered. It wasn't even the mortgage. It was the lesson. My son-in-law had laughed at a gift that carried history, value, and love. He thought it was useless. But when pride crumbled and bills piled high, he realized those old tools represented something he desperately lacked. Wisdom. He once mocked me. Now he listens. He understands. And my daughter's home stands not just because I stepped in, but because he finally learned respect. Life has a way of humbling the arrogant. Sometimes it takes empty wallets and foreclosure notices to teach what a simple gift could have shown from the start. Thank you for joining me on Elder Words. If this story resonated, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more lessons from life's unexpected twists.